Now, in Florida during the 1980s, Christine Falling seemed like the ideal babysitter. She was soft-spoken, she was dependable, she was trustworthy. She gave absolutely no hint of the danger that she posed. But behind that quiet exterior, 5 children and 1 elderly man died in her care, one after another, chalked up to natural causes. But their deaths, they were anything but natural. They were smothered or choked in a way that Christine herself said no one would hear them scream. Hello, welcome to my true criminal abode. As ever, you are very, 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 very welcome. I'm being extra very today. There is a trigger warning for today's case. Obviously, it revolves around murder, in particular child murder. It's not very nice. It's not very graphic, but it's just not very nice, very sad. There is mention of CSA. There is mention of animal abuse as well, briefly. If you are not comfortable with any of those things, like I always say, your mental health comes first. Please, please look after yourself. So let's get on with today's case, which is about the despicable human being, Christine Falling, and the babysitter from hell. So Christine Laverne Slaughter. Yep, she was called Slaughter. Very, very apt. She was born on March the 12th, 1963. She was the second of 4 children, including her older sister Carol and 2 younger brothers, Michael and Earl. Her mother Anne was just 16 years old when she gave birth to Christine, while her father, Thomas, was a lot older at 65. So basically, Christine's mother Anne was still a child. She was 16. And the other thing is, if she was 16 when she gave birth, that means she would have been about 14 when she gave birth to Christine's older sister Carol. It's basically child abuse. Now, the Slaughter family, they lived in Perry, which was a remote and tight-knit town in the Florida Panhandle, approximately 50 miles southeast of Tallahassee, Florida's state capital. Now, like many rural communities, Perry faced persistent economic challenges, with its economy heavily reliant on the lumber industry. Now, Christine's father, he actually worked as a woodsman, but his meagre income left the family in deep financial hardship. Their living conditions were cramped, and the children had limited access to healthcare, adequate nutrition, just basically consistent support. Now, Thomas was often inattentive and also prone to violence. Now, Anne, Christine's mother, don't forget she's 16, and she was overwhelmed by the poverty, by teenage motherhood, her husband's volatility, and she struggled to cope. And she would frequently leave the home for months at a time, probably to get away from her abusive husband. Now, during these absences, Carol and Christine were often sent to live with relatives, while Michael and Earl, her brothers, they were seen as kind of useful for their labour, and they remained with Thomas to assist in grueling manual work. Thomas was suspicious of Anne's long absences and questioned Michael's paternity, only ever acknowledging Earl as his son. Now, this was a family in crisis. They were bound together by survival rather than love or stability. Now, eventually, Anne completely abandoned Carol and 4-year-old Christine allegedly leaving them on a bench at a shopping centre in Perry. And the girls were adopted by Jessie and Dolly Falling, taking on their new surname. So they went from being Slaughter to Falling. Now, the reason that Jessie and Dolly adopted them is that Dolly was unable to have children and she longed for motherhood, and she saw an opportunity to raise the sisters when Jessie, her husband, and a relative of the Slaughter family agreed to help. And together they brought the girls into their home. Now, this couple, they were devout churchgoers, but their religious devotion concealed deep dysfunction, and their home lacked emotional warmth and basically the refuge that the girls so desperately needed. They'd basically jumped from one home which was emotionally and physically lacking into another which was emotionally lacking. Christine and Carol later alleged that Jessie was physically abusive, beating them and locking them in confined spaces. They described him as a volatile alcoholic whose behaviour cast a shadow over their childhood. So they'd gone from one abusive father basically to another, to an abusive stepfather. The girls also claimed that Jessie sexually assaulted them. In later psychiatric evaluations, Christine recounted a harrowing incident. One time, when he physically raped my sister, I had to stand and watch, and I tried to tell my mother what happened. And my father got to me before I could really explain to my mother what had happened. Now, Dolly, she completely dismissed the allegations, accusing Christine of fabricating stories to cause division. In an interview, Dolly said, Christine told me that they had had sex. You know what I mean? She told me, only she put the blame on her sister Carol, and Jessie denied it. He said it wasn't true, so I don't know whether there was anything like that went on or not. I haven't got no proof of it. I think they was trying to break up a home. If you want to know the truth, it was Christine doing it, trying to break the peace between me and my husband. Dolly, it's abuse. Now, I get doing your due diligence because, let's be honest, Christine, as we will find out, is manipulative and may have been causing trouble. But it was both girls saying this, and regardless, believe the children, first thing, then do your due diligence. Now, of course, Jessie denied the allegations, and, I have to be clear that he did deny the allegations. Now, on top of the physical and sexual abuse that Christine suffered, she had always been a sickly child, frequently battling health issues. She was diagnosed with epilepsy early on, and she endured regular seizures that required medication to manage the condition. Now, Christine also faced severe learning and developmental challenges. Later psychiatric evaluations placed her IQ in the borderline range, and her academic progress never advanced beyond a 6th grade level. On top of everything, Christine struggled with her weight, which further deepened her sense of isolation at school, where her developmental delays had already made social and academic life difficult. And obviously, I've seen some cruel things about her weight, and, this isn't anything to do with pointing out the way that people look, because that's disgusting. It's to do with the way something makes a person feel. And I think that was an issue for her. But equally, it's something that she struggled with because she was on all this medication and she was developmentally challenged and all these things. So, it wasn't exactly her fault. But, with all this stuff going on, her behaviour grew increasingly troubling. Christine vented her frustration in disturbing acts of cruelty towards cats, strangling them or dropping them from heights to, quote, test their 9 lives. Her behaviour offers an unsettling glimpse into her developing psyche. It's a known early indicator of conduct disorder or emerging antisocial traits, and widely seen as a warning sign for future violence. But also, abusing animals reflects her desire for control. It shows her detachment from her victims, paired with a disturbing fascination with power over vulnerable beings. Christine later actually claimed that this was her way of showing affection. It was an early warped understanding of love and control that would echo chillingly in her later crimes. And it raises questions about her capacity for empathy, about whether she understood the consequences of her actions and whether she felt any remorse at all. Now, this photo was actually printed in a newspaper of Christine. It shows her with a cat. It's kind of creepy knowing what we know, that they chose this particular photo at the time. So Christine, she was prone to violent outbursts and uncontrollable rages towards people and animals. Christine received none of the care or support that she desperately needed from her adoptive parents. Had she found stability from them, it might have altered the course that she tragically followed. Instead, she remained in constant conflict with them until she became more than they could manage. And eventually, life at the Falling Home was so dysfunctional that the church pastor actually intervened and the girls were sent away. Christine was 9 years old when she was placed in a group foster home called Great Oaks Village in Orlando. Her time at the home offered her a brief reprieve from the chaos of her adoptive family. Now, some accounts suggest that she actually enjoyed the structure and attention, but other accounts describe her as socially isolated and frequently bullied. Caregivers at the home actually described Christine as a liar, a compulsive thief, and a child who broke the rules. So I'm not quite sure which account is the real one. But either way, this desire for attention by lashing out reflects a need for connection. Now, at the age of 12, Christine left the children's home. She returned to the Falling household for a little time, but the physical abuse apparently did continue. In October 1975, Jesse allegedly subjected Christine to a severe beating for being 10 minutes late. He also insisted that she wear shorts to school the following day so that everyone could see the justice marks. Sounds like a great father figure. So Christine ran away. It's not surprising. And after a few weeks living with friends, Christine decided to go to Bluntstown and live with Anne, her birth mother. Basically, Christine went through a really, really unstable period marked by emotional upheaval and a lack of consistent care. And don't forget how old she is, how young she is, I should say. She's like 12, 13 years old. She's young. And as we know, this lack of stability in childhood can cause so many problems, physically, psychologically, emotionally, developmentally, all of it. So anyway, she's back with her birth mother. But Anne wasn't exactly the stabilising force that Christine needed. So by September 1977, Christine was just 14 years old when she married an older man called Bobby Adkins, who was a local man in his 20s. Okay, so she's basically following her mother's footsteps. And also her mother seemingly saw nothing wrong with this age gap. Christine was 14. The marriage was tumultuous and lasted just 6 weeks. There were reports of frequent violent arguments between the couple. Christine accused her husband of abuse, but also admitted to violent behaviour herself, once hurling a 25-pound stereo at him in a fit of rage. But, Christine grew up believing that violence, which she exhibited through strangling cats, she believed that was a way of showing love. So the violence is not exactly unexpected here in her marriage. Now, Christine did later claim that she became pregnant during the marriage, but she lost the child before the relationship ended. Again, I couldn't find a source to kind of verify that. And Christine is not the most trustworthy of characters, but it wouldn't surprise me. Now, after the separation from her husband, Christine's need for attention intensified. And over the next few years, she was admitted to hospital on dozens of occasions. Sometimes they were genuine due to her being sickly, her epileptic seizures. But more than 50 other times, she was admitted for vague and often psychosomatic complaints, including fainting spells, abnormal menstrual bleeding, hallucinations with kind of red dots dancing before her eyes, and even claims of snake bites. So basically, Christine has this massive need for attention. And doctors even suspected Munchausen syndrome, a kind of psychological disorder in which individuals feign or induce illness to gain sympathy. Some individuals associate being ill with receiving love or attention. And as adults, they recreate that dynamic by fabricating symptoms. And of course, not to be confused with Munchausen by proxy, which is where you're kind of creating the symptoms on somebody else. I mean, psychologically, it's pretty similar. It's that need for attention. But, this was fabricating those symptoms on herself. The condition is often rooted in early trauma. And it's worth remembering that mental health issues can trigger physical issues. So stress, anxiety, depression, all those things can bring on physical symptoms. So the link to trauma makes sense. And we also need to remember that as much as we do come to despise this girl, she's a teenager. She's like 15 and she has zero guidance, zero support. And no formal diagnosis was ever made. And by God, she needed some kind of formal diagnosis. And so Christine began to act out in more and more visible ways. And so in 1978, after facing public accusations that she was faking her seizures, she stole money from a local church, reportedly to retaliate against those who doubted her condition. Now, following her arrest, she attempted suicide by overdosing on pills. And just 3 months later, in January 1979, she was arrested again for stealing somebody's wallet. By the age of 16, Christine had returned to Perry in Florida, kind of drifting between homes and struggling to find work. Now, her birth mother, Anne, she urged Christine to return to education or find work, contribute financially. But Christine had no formal education. Her developmental issues and her persistent health complaints, those were things that made finding work difficult. She had few viable job options. And so Christine relied on handouts and occasional petty crime to get by. But there was one kind of work that always seemed available: babysitting. And despite her erratic behaviour, neighbours and relatives entrusted Christine with their children. Her quiet, childlike demeanour made her seem harmless. But it would turn out to be a deadly illusion that would cost lives. So over the next 2 years, Christine Falling babysat for families mainly across northern Florida. Now, I'm not sure how much of the babysitting was paid employment or kind of in return for room and board, because she was kind of drifting around and, she was actually staying with some of the families that she was babysitting for. But either way, it's pretty much the same thing. So the first of Christine's victims was 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson, affectionately known as Muffin. On February the 22nd, 1980, Christine, who was 17, she was hired by Cassidy's parents to take care of their daughter while they were at work digging for worms to sell as bait. That just sounds like an horrendous job. But anyway, 4 hours later, Cassidy fell gravely ill, becoming limp and unresponsive. Christine took her to the doctors, where they suspected encephalitis, which is basically inflammation of the brain. And Cassidy was rushed to Tallahassee Memorial Regional Medical Center. But tragically, Cassidy died 3 days later. Now, Dr. Jerry Harris, the associate medical examiner, noted bruising on Cassidy's scalp and concluded that Cassidy had actually died from a blow to the head prior to her death. There was a red streak across her neck, which was initially unnoticed by her parents until it was highlighted by the doctor. And this also, obviously, further raised suspicions. Now, according to Christine's story, she claimed she briefly left Cassidy alone in her room and returned to find her unconscious on the floor, suggesting that she had fallen from her crib. Now, an elderly witness, Tom Griffin, later described that Christine had been alone with Cassidy in the bedroom for 10 to 15 minutes before emerging and saying, "Granddaddy, I don't believe Muffin's breathing." Now, one of the attending physicians at the hospital did not believe Christine's account, asserting that the pattern of blunt force trauma noted in the autopsy did not match a simple fall from a crib. If it was a younger baby, okay. They are a lot more vulnerable due to softer skulls and also limited mobility because, it's not like they can kind of brace their fall. So a fall for a very young baby would be a lot more dangerous. But for a 2-year-old, toddlers are much more physically resilient and they would try and break their fall and just not saying they wouldn't injure themselves, but the injuries would probably be a lot more minor. But of course, it happens and, you just got to land the wrong way or something. But still, it just didn't quite add up. And actually, a concerned physician wrote a note recommending that the police investigate Christine. But the note was misplaced and the warning was completely ignored. And, ultimately, the lack of definitive physical evidence led to the case being quietly closed and Christine walked free. Now, not every single child that Christine looked after died. Some became suddenly, inexplicably ill. At the time, there was no reason to suspect anything other than natural causes. It was only later, when investigators began kind of putting the pieces together, that these other cases would all become linked to Christine. Now, the first of these close calls, we will call them, occurred a few days after Cassidy's death, when 3-year-old Kyle Summerlin was hospitalized with suspected meningitis. Now, thankfully, Kyle survived. And at the time, like I say, there was absolutely no reason to suspect anything was wrong. It was only later on, when investigators kind of revisited the case, did questions emerge about how abruptly the illness had appeared and how little it resembled classic meningitis symptoms. At the time, though, the incident wasn't investigated further, and Christine soon relocated from Blountstown to Lakeland in Florida and resumed her babysitting duties. Now, Christine's next murder took place a year later. In fact, almost a year to the day after Cassidy Johnson's murder. I don't know exactly why there was such a big gap, but there were the missed calls in between. And I personally wonder if she kind of felt emboldened with Cassidy, the fact that she got away with it. And then she tried it with Kyle, which failed. But she hung back a bit, possibly kind of getting the nerve. That's my speculation on it. But on February the 23rd, 1981, Christine was caring for her 4-year-old nephew, Jeffrey Davis, when, according to Christine's account, Jeffrey took a nap on the couch while she was sitting next to him, but he never woke up. Just like that, he never woke up. Now, the family didn't have a phone, so Christine went to a neighbour's house to ask for help, and Jeffrey was rushed to the hospital. An autopsy later determined that the cause of death was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. Now, because myocarditis is often caused by a viral infection, doctors speculated that he may have succumbed to a contagious illness. And basically, they didn't suspect foul play. Now, Christine, obviously, she appeared distraught. And the family was actually sympathetic towards Christine, believing that she had gone through this traumatic incident, which is absolutely sick. But here she is, getting that attention again. And the poor family, meanwhile, they never suspected her for a second. They did not realize that she was the one that had caused their son's death. And also, like I said, this was her nephew. So this was a member of her family. There is kind of a familial connection to some of these families, and probably why she was so trusted. So we're going to move on to 3 days after Jeffrey's death, to February the 26th. Jeffrey's family is grieving. They had gathered for Jeffrey's funeral. And among the mourners were the parents of Jeffrey's 2-year-old cousin, Joseph Joeboy Spring. Now again, this is Jeffrey's cousin, so we assume there's going to be a familial connection to Christine. I'm not entirely sure what the familial connection is, but if she was definitely related to Jeffrey, then there's going to be a connection to Joseph as well. So like I say, the family is grieving Jeffrey, and because they have got absolutely no reason to suspect Christine at all, they asked Christine to babysit Joseph while they attended Jeffrey's service. It's sick. It's really, really sick. It was a decision that they would come to regret, because while the family grieved for one child, another child was being taken away. Like his cousin before him, Joseph went down for a nap and never woke up. Honestly, at the funeral of one of your victims, this is a whole other level of cruelty. It really, really is. Now, doctors initially attributed Joseph's death to a viral infection again, possibly the same one that was suspected in Jeffrey's case. Now, at the time, the theory seemed plausible because the boys, they were close in age, they had recently played together, they were related. So basically, the medical staff were all focused on this viral route for these boys dying. But obviously, with this fear of there being a viral infection, there was now this fear in the community that it might spread to other children in the area. There was no virus. The virus was Christine. But at the time, they thought there was a viral infection killing the children. And that fear intensified just 2 days later when 2 more children under Christine's care, 2 more close calls. So these children didn't die. But there were 2 more children under Christine's care that became ill. 14-month-old Jeffrey Hale, who was a friend of Joseph's, was rushed to Lakeland General Hospital where he became unresponsive. While his parents remained by their son's side at the hospital, Christine babysat his older brother, 3-year-old Charles Hale, who also collapsed, suffering a seizure. He was transferred to the Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg. Now, like I say, fortunately, these brothers, they survived. But their sudden illnesses fueled these already concerns that all these deaths might be connected by a virus. And the doctors were connecting Christine, but they thought her connection was that she was a silent carrier of an undetected virus. Oh, okay. So basically, like I say, the only virus is the fact that people opened their doors to this girl. But anyway, tissue samples from Joseph's autopsy were sent to the Epidemiology Research Center in Tampa. But there was no definitive link found. That's because there was no virus. But the investigation then broadened, testing Christine's blood and fecal matter, screening family members of the victims, and looking into other local children who had taken ill around the same time. They even analysed Lakeland water supply, but there was still no link. So basically, within the community, fear of this virus was spreading faster than the facts. Now, basically, Carol Davis, Jeffrey's mother, she was barred from returning to work at a petrol station after her employer grew concerned that she might pass on whatever had killed her son. This poor woman has lost her son, and now she can't go back to work and she has to face financial hardship on top of it. You know, viruses, it's those things you can't see, it's those invisible killers. And it does make people panic and behave irrationally and react in ways they wouldn't normally do. And this is what was happening. Meanwhile, Christine watched on, unfazed by the fear and confusion going on around her, reportedly saying later, if they dumb enough, they can't figure it out for themselves, then why should I tell them? I mean, they're doctors, you know. It was like a game with me, and I was getting away with it. What a bitch. So 5 months after the deaths of cousins Jeffrey Davis and Joseph Spring, Christine remained not just involved with her extended family, but also trusted by them. Now, it's a bit confusing, but you know, I said Jeffrey was her nephew. That's because Geneva Daniels, who was Christine's stepsister, was Jeffrey's mother. It's very confusing. You just need to know that there's a familial connection. Now, Geneva, like I say, is Christine's stepsister. And Geneva had an 8-month-old daughter called Jennifer. So Christine was also Jennifer's aunt, I guess. But tragically, Jennifer Daniels would also lose her life at the hands of Christine Falling. So on July the 6th, 1981, about a week before Jennifer's death, Christine was looking after her niece while Geneva attended a funeral. I don't think this was a funeral of anybody relevant to this case per se. But for God's sake, Christine seems to have this habit of striking while the parents are at funerals. And I think significantly, whilst their parents are kind of in a vulnerable state. Now, Christine was taking care of Jennifer at the trailer home of a friend, Teresa Odom. And I'm not entirely sure why they were staying at a friend's trailer, but they were. And anyway, Christine took Jennifer into the bathroom to bathe her. And according to the friend, to Teresa Odom's deposition, Christine remained inside with Jennifer for approximately 20 minutes before emerging with the baby wrapped in a towel and saying that Jennifer was unconscious. Christine said, quote, "She's out. She's not coming to." Now, Jennifer was rushed to Madison County Memorial Hospital, where Christine told medical staff that the baby had had a seizure. And that kind of figures because seizures would be something that Christine is familiar with because she gets them herself. So she would sound knowledgeable. However, nurses noted red marks on Jennifer's throat and burst blood vessels across her face. Symptoms, funnily enough, not consistent with seizures. Nevertheless, Jennifer was quickly discharged. So she is alive, she's discharged, and she's referred to a doctor in Perry for further evaluation. And no formal investigation was opened. So Jennifer is fine, and no one suspects anything, which in itself seems crazy to me because these kids are related. The family must have been talking to each other by this point. So there must be something that they're kind of having some kind of niggle going, what again? You know? And I absolutely do not mean that disrespectfully whatsoever to the family, because the family wouldn't want to believe that one of their own was responsible. It's just kind of hard to wrap your head around in hindsight. And also tragically sad because Christine is playing on the natural trust that her family members have in her. So just over a week later, on July the 14th, Christine accompanied her stepsister Geneva and her niece Jennifer to the Taylor County Health Department, where Jennifer received routine childhood vaccinations for, routine childhood things: polio, diphtheria, whooping cough, tetanus, those things. Now, afterwards, they stopped at a Winn-Dixie supermarket. Geneva went inside to the shop and left Christine alone with Jennifer in the car. Now, apparently, Jennifer would not stop crying. So Christine made her stop. When Geneva returned, the scene turned to absolute chaos. Geneva was screaming, "She's dead, she's dead," while Christine was crying, "Oh no, not again." Not again? Yes, again. That's what happens when you wrap your hands around a baby's throat. Weird that. Or you smother a baby. Weirdly enough. Yes, again. But Jennifer's cause of death was ruled natural, possibly a reaction to the vaccines earlier that day. Or the other theory was sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. Because at that time, you've got to remember that SIDS was actually poorly understood. And it was kind of frequently used as a blanket explanation for unexplained infant deaths. Today, medical advances and public health campaigns, they have drastically reduced SIDS-related fatalities. But the lack of understanding at the time meant that deaths like Jennifer's were very often just chalked up to bad luck. But this was anything but bad luck. Not to mention that we now have 3 victims from her own family. These weren't strangers, like I said. Her willingness to harm shows the emotional disconnect from her crimes. If she was prepared to do this to her family, she was a serious threat to absolutely anybody vulnerable. What I find fascinating, though, is that her family still protected her. Geneva, Jennifer's mother, initially told the police that she was with Christine at the time, just so that they wouldn't think she was ever alone with Jennifer. I mean, Christine has literally just murdered her daughter, and she is protecting Christine. She did actually later tell the truth, but that's why some accounts are a bit confusing online, because she actually gave a completely different version of events at first in order to protect Christine, and said that she was with her the whole time. But she obviously wasn't. She had gone into the shop, she came back, and Christine had murdered her daughter by the time she came back from the shop. It's absolutely crazy. So many people describe Christine as this sweet, patient girl that was great with kids, and she was literally murdering them under their noses. Now, this one is a little bit different. We're into 1982 now, and it's about 6 months after Jennifer's death. Funnily enough, the families were growing a tad hesitant, leaving their children in Christine's care about bloody time. But what it meant for Christine was that she had to briefly seek work outside of babysitting. So in January, she took a housekeeping job in her hometown of Perry, working for a 77-year-old man named Wilburn Swindle. Obviously, Wilburn is a lot older than her usual type. But the important thing is his vulnerability. Wilburn had cancer and a history of heart problems, and he was living alone. And so he needed help around the house. Christine was a family friend, so Wilburn took a chance on her. It was a chance that obviously did not pay off, because on her very first day, Wilburn collapsed and died at home. Now, according to Christine, when she left Wilburn at his house for a few hours, he was sitting in his chair perfectly alive, and when she came back, he had toppled to the floor and died of a heart attack. Now, Christine was dreading more negative publicity because people are beginning to talk now. They're starting to kind of cotton on a little bit. And so she asked Wilburn's family to keep quiet about her employment, and so the death was never publicised. What on earth? I mean, I know there's a dead body, but if you wouldn't mind just pretending I wasn't here, I'd appreciate it. I'm just going to slip out the back door now and just, pretend you didn't see me. What the actual? What the actual? And again, no disrespect to the family. It's a hindsight thing. It's because in hindsight you kind of know what happens. So the family keeps it under wraps, and the police are obviously completely unaware of Christine's presence and never connected her to his death. So no autopsy was performed, and his death was put down as natural causes. Which, again, it's understandable because he did have this poor health. So it kind of makes sense. He was an elderly gentleman in poor health. People just assumed that, unfortunately, he did die from a heart attack or whatever. Now, I'm going to go off the timeline a little bit here by about 10 months, just to show how maddening it is that Christine wasn't connected to this case. So it later came to light during a deposition hearing that over the summer, and it's January when Wilburn died, so a few months after Wilburn's death in the summer, a woman contacted the state attorney's office with concerns about bluish marks on Wilburn's neck. Obviously, Wilburn had been buried by this point, so with this woman a few months later saying, well, actually, I did see some blue marks on his neck, Wilburn's body was exhumed. And photographs of the markings were admitted into evidence, and they were found to be strikingly similar to the injuries also found on Jennifer Daniels, the red marks on her throat that the nurses noted. He had very similar markings. So basically, as a result of this woman coming forward, I'm not sure if this woman was a family member. I assume she was. She was probably a family member that was suspicious of Christine telling everyone to not say anything. But as a result, investigators then found out that Christine had been working in Wilburn's home and were able to tie her to the crime. But this is all obviously a bit later on, like I said, I've gone off the timeline a bit, but just to tie it to the crime now and keep the crime together. But that's not all, because when I read about Wilbur's case, I remember thinking to myself, why did she kill him on her first day? It's a bit sus. But basically, it came to light that Wilburn had been found face down in the living room. His pockets were turned inside out. Somebody had rummaged through his pockets. According to Deputy Hugh Popple, Mr. Swindle was known to have large amounts of money, and he was known to bury his money. There were places under his house and around his house that were dug up. So basically, Christine has a history of theft. She was known to drift and live off handouts, and she did do petty crime. We know about some thefts that she did earlier in her life. So to me, it makes complete sense that if he was known to have cash lying around, that she killed him on the first day. So obviously at the time of Wilburn's death, none of this comes to light. It's a few months later that he is exhumed, and, it all comes to light, tying Christine to the crime. So you'd think a few months later, there's these marks on his neck, there's evidence of the theft. You would think that Christine would be charged. No. The family never saw justice for Wilburn's death. Don't you just hate it when that happens? So anyway, getting back on the timeline. It's January, and Wilbur's found dead, but it's chalked up to natural causes. For now, the case kind of fades into the background. We have, so far, 5 murders and 3 close calls behind her. People are giving her sideways looks. She is trying to lie low, and with a dubious reputation in Florida, Christine travelled north to Proctorville in Ohio. And I think she kind of floats about for a couple of weeks. And eventually she's taken in by Linda and Ricky Harris, who offered her a room and board in exchange for babysitting their 6-month-old daughter, Pokey. I've got no idea how Christine comes to know these people. how she wheedles her way into their home. But she does. And on January the 23rd, Christine emerged from the family's back bedroom in a panic and told Linda, Pokey's mother, that something was wrong with Pokey. When Linda got into the bedroom, Pokey was lying on her back, not breathing, and her skin and lips were blue. Linda began shaking her daughter until the colour returned to her face. Thank God Pokey was fine. It was another close call, but Christine ain't stopping. Pokey was taken to the hospital where doctors diagnosed a viral infection. Goddamn viral infections, they get about a bit, don't they? No further action was taken. I do actually just want to pause and point out something, because with Cassidy Johnson, Christine raised the alarm and took Cassidy to the doctors. Jeffrey Davis, she got help from the neighbours. With Jennifer, she comes out of the bathroom and she says, Jennifer's not breathing, whatever she says. And with Pokey, she alerts Pokey's mother that Pokey's not breathing. So Christine does appear is important, but she is appearing to get help. Which, there's probably a few reasons for this. Firstly, Christine is trying to control the narrative. By being the one to raise the alarm, she positions herself as a concerned caregiver rather than a perpetrator. It gives her plausible deniability and allows her to remain close to the situation without arousing suspicion. Secondly, she may have felt a psychological need to be involved in the aftermath. Alerting others could have been part of a distorted emotional cycle where she sought attention, sympathy, or validation in the wake of the crisis that she created. And thirdly, it might have been impulsive, where she panicked afterwards. She genuinely kind of panicked and reverted to the expected response of trying to get help without fully thinking through the consequences. Now, ultimately, whatever her reasoning, she wasn't alerting people because of remorse, but because of a mix of manipulation, self-preservation, and control. Definitely control. And to me, that is a very dangerous individual, because she is going to keep on doing it until she is physically stopped. So like I say, she's in Ohio. And up until this point, to the point where she nearly killed Pokey, Linda doesn't suspect Christine. But the next day, Christine showed Linda a tabloid clipping about the babies that had been dying under her care. I mean, crazy. No one's got a clue. And she tells Linda off her own back. Again, it's a combination between attention-seeking and control. She wanted to control the story. Or maybe she just wanted to know how Linda would react. Either way, it's bloody manipulative and attention-seeking because, she's not getting the attention for what she's doing. So she literally has to show people newspaper clippings of the fact that she's potentially murdered other babies. Now, obviously, Linda is bloody alarmed and ordered her to leave the home immediately. The strange thing is, Christine refused to go and actually returned uninvited 2 days later. And the police had to be called and she had to literally be escorted off the property. Now, the police actually sent her to City Mission in Huntington, which was across the river in West Virginia. And it's reported that there she showed residents a photo of Pokey, claiming the child was her own. I'm going to assume she was attention-seeking. Another source claims that it was her attempt of getting financial support from people through deception, making people feel sorry for her and giving her money. I have no idea. But either way, just thank God, Pokey was alive. And Christine was basically still trying to manipulate people around her, whether it was through attention seeking or through getting financial support. She was still manipulating people. It's what she did. So Christine spent the next few months in West Virginia, where she ran into legal trouble, getting arrested 3 times and charged with public drunkenness, fighting, grand larceny. But the thing is, she was getting homesick. She was in a completely different state and she just wanted to go home. She wanted to go back to Florida. And in May 1982, she returned back and returned to babysitting. Now, thankfully, this will be her final victim. But a couple of months after returning to Florida in July 1982, Christine, who is 19 years old, she ends up in Blountstown, where her murderous spree basically began with Cassidy. And she was living in a rundown trailer with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson. Now, Robert was also the uncle of Christine's first victim, Cassidy Johnson. Kind of crazy. Now, that summer, Christine accompanied 17-year-old Lisa Coleman and her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman, on a shopping trip. I'm not sure how exactly they knew each other. I don't think this is one that she's related to the child in any way. But I don't suppose it really matters because at the end of the day, children are dying. Later that night, Travis fell suddenly ill and was hospitalized with pneumonia and heavy bleeding from the nose. He remained at Tallahassee Memorial Regional Medical Center for 5 days before being discharged with a prescription for liquid antibiotics. Now, Lisa, Travis's mother, she was obviously ecstatic that her son was well and he had made a recovery, and she basically wanted to celebrate. And so she asked Christine if she would babysit him so she could go out and celebrate the fact that he was well and recovered. Oh, ironic. And on the evening of July the 2nd, Lisa left Travis in Christine's care while she went out with her sister and their respective boyfriends. In a newspaper article, Lisa actually said that she was aware of Christine's reputation, but later confessed, "I just didn't believe it." Believe it, believe it. Like I say, I really do not. The last thing I would ever want is to be disrespectful to victims. These people have lost their children. But it's just so difficult to understand. 4 dead babies, 3 close calls. And I mean, even if you didn't think that she murdered them, you'd be like, no, that girl's got evil jujus, there's something kind of weird. She's possessed or something. There's an entity attached to her. Even if you don't think it's Christine herself, you'd just be like, I'm not taking that risk. So I don't know. And of course, Lisa should have tragically believed it because by dawn, Travis was dead. So what actually happened was that Christine took Travis in on the evening of July the 2nd, and basically in the early hours of the 3rd, Christine's boyfriend awoke to find 10-week-old Travis dead on a mattress beside their bed. There was dried blood under the baby's nose and on his blanket as well. Christine claimed that the baby had been fine during the night when she checked on him. I'm sure he was. If only she'd walked out the door again. But that he must have just stopped breathing in his sleep. Travis was first taken to Calhoun General Hospital, and then he was transferred to the medical examiner's office, who was Dr. Joe Sapala. Now, no definitive cause of death was found, but the baby did show swelling of the brain and lungs, as well as burst blood vessels in his eyes. And these findings were consistent with SIDS, sudden infant death, but they were also consistent with suffocation. And thankfully, people were getting suspicious because tissue and fluid samples were taken and sent to a specialized lab in Fort Lauderdale for toxicology screening. And so, thank God, they are starting to look beyond these natural deaths now. Now, Travis was buried the same day that he died at a small cemetery south of Blountstown. This broke my heart because the casket was reportedly made from pieces of wood from an old house. And friends dug his grave. I think they were just that poor that the friends dug his grave. It's just really sad. The poverty, I think, at the time, it's one of the reasons why it took so long for something to be done. It's awful, but the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be dismissed. It's an awful truth. And basically, they were looking at poverty because when the children fell ill, the explanations leaned towards viruses, towards poor hygiene, because they're poor, environmental factors, because they're poor. Some doctors even suggested the illnesses might have come from not washing their hands properly. Basically, poverty equals less access to medical advocacy and fewer resources to demand answers. And Christine benefited from that apathy. Until now. Now, despite 5 suspicious deaths, and I'm not including Wilburn because the police are completely unaware about her connection at this point, but right now, Travis is dead, and despite the 5 suspicious deaths across 2.5 years, Christine is not arrested. But the good thing is they were investigating. They did not write Travis off and were tying other children to Christine. And on July the 9th, 1982, a multi-county task force was formed to examine possible links between the cases. Thank bloody God. It marked the first formal collaboration between law enforcement and medical examiners, across the jurisdictions. Because up until this point, of course, coordination was kind of fragmented at best. Christine had murdered in both Calhoun and Taylor counties, and because the agencies, they weren't kind of sharing information, and there was no centralized system either for vetting childminders or domestic workers or anything like that, her movements and history just basically slipped through all the administrative cracks. So this task force was the first real attempt to connect all those dots together. Desperate for answers, the authorities actually tested Christine for undiagnosed illnesses that might explain the deaths. Again, they're going down the bloody old diagnosed viruses thing. I guess the difference this time, though, is that they are testing Christine to rule the theory out as opposed to rule it in. Like the first time, they assumed that that was the reason and they were kind of doing everything to rule that in as a theory. This time, I think they're just kind of covering all the bases so that they can rule it out definitively as a theory, which is kind of better. Now, of course, Christine knew exactly what had happened to the babies, but she leaned into public sympathy. Outside the Calhoun County Health Center, where she had submitted blood and stool samples for analysis, she said, "I'm just interested in finding out what it is. If I have something, I just want to find out." She is really playing along with the, I don't know, what could be possibly going on kind of sympathy card, She even told reporters that she was just as confused as everybody else. Yeah, right. She said, "I've been through it with 5 young uns. I don't know what's happening. It's enough to get you scared. This girl is brazen. And she's so young as well to be this brazen." Now, obviously we've got the virus rumours, but there were other rumours as well circulating because people didn't have a clue what was going on. There were things like contaminated formula, undiagnosed infections, malnutrition, even witchcraft. People were kind of clutching at any explanation, but of course there was only ever one explanation. Christine falling was not infecting people or casting spells, but she was choking and smothering children with her bare hands. Christine Falling was a serial killer. On July the 13th, Christine voluntarily entered Goodwood Manor, which was a psychiatric unit at Tallahassee Memorial Regional Medical Center. She admitted to feeling suicidal. Now, whether it was guilt or whether it was just kind of running away for a bit, I don't know. But either way, the noose is closing in, and she probably realised that. And she was kind of struggling to keep up the act, I guess. And it was here, whilst in the psychiatric unit, that cracks first began to appear in her kind of, I don't know what's going on, sympathy card demeanour. In a private visit, Christine confided in her sister Carol Phillips, because don't forget about her sister Carol, and they were very, very close. But she actually confided in Carol that she had killed 5 children. So she is finally admitting it. To fill you in a little bit about what Carol had been up to. So around the time that Christine and Carol left the care home and Christine ran away, Carol had a baby. She would have been extremely young. She would have been about 13 or so. So, this whole having kids really young runs through the family. Now, sadly, Carol's baby daughter died in 1977, reportedly from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Now, fast forward a few years later, and Carol is visiting her sister, who confesses to her that she's murdered 5 babies. Don't forget, Carol has lost her own daughter through SIDS, so emotionally it's going to affect her. But during a press conference and depositions in 1982, Carol actually goes on to defend Christine and spoke in support of her. I don't know what it is about this girl. Why does everybody feel the need to defend her? And it was during one of these press conferences that Carol wanted to prove how amazing Christine was with children, and she admitted that Christine looked after her own daughter. Quote, "I had a child of my own that Christine was around. She was only with her briefly, and a couple of months after Christine left, my daughter also passed away. Christine had no connection with this. She loves children. I saw her with my own daughter. She cared for her as if she were her own child." Now, out of respect for Carol, I'm not going down the road of insinuating a link. Besides which, timeline-wise, it happened a few weeks after Christine was with her. Whether Christine could have done something beforehand, though, and it just took a while, I don't know. Like I say, out of respect for Carol, I'm not going down that link, and I actually have no idea. Have absolutely no idea whether I suspect Christine or not. What I think, though, is relevant here and what is interesting is just people defending her. She confesses to Carol. Carol's been through the heartbreak of losing a baby, and yet she still defends her. It must have raked up so many painful memories of losing her own child. But there was something about Christine that garnered sympathy from people. And don't forget, it wasn't just Carol. There was Geneva, Jennifer's mum. There was Wilburn's family. Again and again, people stepped in to protect her and give her the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, Christine has opened up to Carol, her sister. And during her week at Goodwood, she opened up even more about her crimes, revealing how she used pillows or blankets to smother the children's faces while they slept, a method that she referred to as smotheration. It was something she had seen on television. Simple and easy, she said. No one would hear them scream. And of course, suffocation leaves far fewer visible signs than manual strangulation. There's very often no bruising, no broken bones, no obvious signs of trauma. And even when they were choked, in infants, the hyoid bone, I don't know how you say that, hyoid. There's a bone, anyway, that's in the throat. This bone is very often fractured in adult strangulation, and it kind of gives away the fact that a person was strangled. But in infants, it's kind of still quite soft and less likely to break. So basically, smothering or choking babies would have been a lot more difficult to detect. Now, Christine also claimed that she was hearing voices telling her to kill the baby. She actually tried using, the fact that she was hearing voices as a defense in court, suggesting mental instability, but the claim was met with skepticism, no surprise there. And so basically, that just wasn't accepted as a defense in court later on. On July the 20th, she is still inside the psychiatric hospital, and she finally breaks down and gave a taped confession to Calhoun County Sheriff Buddy Smith and Deputy Ronnie Stone. Now, she is pretty explicit with the details. Trigger warning, I'm going to tell you the details that she told the investigators. So when asked about Cassidy Johnson, Christine said, "She got kinda rowdy or something. Anyway, I choked her until she quit breathing and she had turned purple." When asked about Jeffrey Davis, Christine said they had come in from playing and he made her mad. Quote, "I was already kind of mad that morning and I just took it out on him. I started choking him until he was dead." Regarding Joseph Spring, she said, "He had laid down for a nap and he was asleep. And I don't know, I just got the urge. I wanted to kill him. So I went down and choked him." About Jennifer Daniels, she explained, "Well, her mama had went in the grocery store to buy groceries and she was continually crying and crying and crying and it made me mad. So I just put my hands around her neck and choked her until she shut up." And finally, when asked about Travis Coleman, Christine coldly stated, "I just choked him. No apparent reason, I guess. I just picked him up off his pallet and choked him to death and laid him back down." So basically, she killed these little babies, these little children, because they annoyed her with their crying. Somebody really should have told her that that's what babies do. Basically, she felt like it, is what she was saying. She just felt like it. She had this urge to kill them, so she did. When Christine was asked if she had anything to say about any of the children, she said, "Not other than I killed them. That's about all I got to say. I don't know why I did none of this." Her statements were just so clinical and showed an absolute chilling absence of any empathy whatsoever. She was completely devoid of remorse. There was just nothing there. So a little over a week after entering Goodwood, Christine was released on July the 22nd and immediately arrested, thank God. I mean, she had confessed, so they had no choice but to arrest her. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, those of Travis Coleman and Cassidy Johnson, and held without bond in Calhoun County Jail. Now, these 2 charges were the only ones brought against her at the time due to jurisdictional constraints. Travis and Cassidy had died in Blountstown, placing their cases with Calhoun County's authority. Now, Joseph Spring, Jeffrey Davis, and Jennifer Daniels, their deaths occurred elsewhere, and they required kind of extra coordination to pursue the charges. Now, don't forget that Christine actually confessed while she was in the psychiatric unit, and this was something that the defense team actually challenged, the legality of her confession, arguing that because she was in this psychiatric facility and not formally under arrest at the time, the informal nature of the interviews of her confession was basically legally invalid. It compromised due process. Now, I have to say, I did find it kind of odd that her confession was inside the psychiatric unit, but ultimately, it didn't matter because the court ruled that the confession was admissible and accepted it as part of the evidence against her. Thank God, because I think so much of this case just kind of rested on that confession. Now, attention then turned to Christine's mental competency. In other words, was she fit to stand trial? Court-appointed specialists were tasked with evaluating her psychological state, and they reviewed her history of unexplained hospitalizations, borderline intellectual functioning, Her claims of hearing voices. Some speculated whether she showed traits of Munchausen by proxy. There were also questions about whether her behaviour pointed to a more serious mental health condition, something that may have shaped her actions and how she saw the world. I would say it's possible, but I mean, that ship had sailed. They should have done that a few years back, you know? They looked into the abuse that she suffered growing up. Her biological father, Thomas Slaughter, had reportedly choked Christine and her sister until they turned blue, hence the link to choking. I mean, she saw violence as a form of affection. So, and Christine herself actually later wondered whether that early violence influenced her desire to kind of do the same thing. Ultimately, however, her claims were kind of seen as attempts to justify the killings after the fact, not grounds for diminished responsibility. And so Christine Falling was determined legally sane and she was fit to stand trial. In September 1982, 19-year-old Christine Falling appeared in court for pre-trial hearings related to the murder of Cassidy Johnson, Travis Coleman, and Jennifer Daniels. Now, even though she had been formally charged with just the 3 murders, because those were the cases with the strongest forensic evidence and jurisdictional clarity at the time, she was still facing the possibility of 6 death penalty charges, including the deaths of Jeffrey Davis, Joseph Spring, and Wilburn Swindle, because, what she had done to Wilburn also came out around this time as well. Now, these cases obviously hadn't been prosecuted, but she was still facing those as charges. So basically, facing the possibility of 6 death penalty charges, she accepted a plea deal to avoid the death sentence. Now, her guilty pleas were entered into 2 separate hearings later that year. First in Calhoun County Circuit Court, where she admitted to killing Cassidy and Travis, and then in Taylor County Circuit Court, where she pleaded guilty to the murder of Jennifer Daniels. The deaths of Jeffrey Davis, Joseph Spring, and Wilburn Swindle, they were never prosecuted. And I always feel so sorry for the families when this happens. At least the person responsible is being held accountable, but it just still feels kind of like unfinished business. And if that's the way I feel, my heart bleeds for how these poor families must feel. Now, throughout the hearings, Christine appeared largely emotionless. That really does not surprise me in this case. She genuinely lacked any kind of empathy, and she offered no insight into her motives, repeating only that the voices had compelled her to kill. Later that month, she was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Now, it was a controversial decision, with many relatives of the victims believing that it was way too tolerant, given the scale of the cruelty of her crimes. They were not happy. Christine was transferred to Broward Correctional Institution, where she quickly drew attention for disruptive behaviour. Within months, she had set fire to her mattress. Nobody was injured, but she ended up being placed in solitary confinement for 30 days. Basically, she is still attention-seeking and still exhibiting unwillingness to take responsibility for what she had done. If you want to get out, you would stay out of trouble and do everything to prove that you want to be integrated back into society again. You'd apologise, you'd get treatment, and even then, obviously there's no guarantee that the person has changed. But at least it's a step in the right direction. Setting fire to your mattress, that is not a step in the right direction. Her crimes were about those babies and Wilburn, but she is making everything about her. So in 2007, Christine became eligible for parole. Records, however, are unclear whether a hearing was actually held. But there was a hearing 10 years later in 2017, and as you can imagine, that was met with major opposition, understandably so. The Calhoun County Sheriff's Office, along with the victims' families, submitted written statements urging the commission to deny her release. One prosecutor even referred to her as the babysitter from hell. Absolutely nobody appeared on Christine's behalf. Not her family, no legal advocates, nobody wanted to defend this girl. And it's a complete 180. You think about everybody going out of their way to protect her. Nobody was there for her in her corner during this parole hearing. The Florida Parole Commission unanimously rejected her application, citing the horrific nature of her offences and her apparent lack of remorse or rehabilitation. You know, it really is very sad when you have somebody that is so young that has been failed by the system. She was failed by the system, by her parents, by her family. She was just failed by everybody. The signs were there so early on that she needed help. Her early life was punctuated by missed red flags, animal cruelty, psychosomatic illnesses, exposure to things that no child should ever be exposed to. Not to mention the added difficulties in her life, like the developmental issues and her health issues, the epilepsy. You know, these are all things that contributed to an emotional detachment and a distorted worldview. Christine Falling needed help. Was what she went on to do preventable? Who knows? But early intervention is not going to do any harm, is it? Mental health support, removal from her abusive home, physical things like nutrition, medical support, a stable roof over your head, because she was floating about literally all over the place, not belonging anywhere. Living in poverty is hard, and I do find it absolutely sad and tragic that this child did not get adequate support, which not only could it have made Christine's life better, but could have prevented the tragedy of 6 other lives being lost. Violence is a learned behaviour, and if that's what she is taught from an early age, she needs support to kind of correct that behaviour. And if that support is not in place, how is she ever going to know any difference? Now, obviously, I'm not defending Christine, the adult. Well, and even then, saying adult is kind of loose. She's 19. She's not that grown. I'm not defending what she does. It just makes me cross that support was not there for her when she was younger, when it was needed. And like I say, not just for her, but for the families that she goes on to hurt. And as we always say, you know, it's absolutely not a defense, because a lot of people have problems, and the choices that Christine made in response to her trauma, they were intentional responses. Her own life was defined by powerlessness, and this was a way for her to reclaim some of that control. But she did so in a way that displayed calculated cruelty in targeting vulnerable, defenseless victims. And as much as we try and understand that context, you know, the background, where she came from and how that kind of explains her actions, it can never excuse them. Never. It can never absolve her of her responsibility for the choice that she made to inflict harm on others. Christine Falling's next hearing was scheduled for 2024, but as of now, from all sources that I can find, there is no public record confirming whether or not that hearing ever took place. However, official records do list a presumptive release date of 2254, a timeline that is so distant, we're talking over 200 years away. It's effectively guaranteed that Christine Falling is going to remain incarcerated for life. It's going to take something absolutely extraordinary to change that. And frankly, let's hope nothing extraordinary ever does happen, because Christine Falling is exactly where she belongs. And she must never, ever be released. That is the story of Christine Falling, the babysitter from hell, literally. It's horrible, really, really horrible. And it's horrible when it's people that you trust as well, people that you entrust with your children that will turn around and do something like that. It's horrible. And it leaves you wondering who in this world you can actually trust. So as ever, you be kind, you look after yourselves, you look after your loved ones, and see you back here for another case at my... I don't know why I'm talking weird. I think my mouth I just start to get really tired and flagged, and then I start talking like a lunatic. So, see you back here, hopefully, for another case at my true criminal abode. Bye.
See you.